I would say probably the biggest thing is to be curious, to be open-minded, to park any preconceived notions at the door when you walk into that boardroom. Because you're elected it's a funny position. You're elected as a politician. In most provinces, you run at the same time as when your local municipal elections are taking place. So your mayor and council, they are truly answering to the community. But once a board of education or trustee is elected, they become part of a corporate board. So when you make a decision as a board, you may not agree with the board and you might vote against a decision, but the minute that decision is made, we have a responsibility to support that decision. So that's the difference. You're not seeing how party politics play the same role.
I've often argued that principals are the linchpin to success of schools and the linchpin to success of teacher being. I would also argue that school boards are the linchpin to success for the district. They are the ones that set the pathway, that set the vision and the direction that school districts go. And when you have a good school board, you have a good school system. And no better person to talk to than the vice president of the Canadian School Board Association, current chair of West Vancouver Schools, Carolyn Broady. I met Carolyn over a decade ago, as you'll hear in the story that she relays of our first time meeting. And she has just been a steady voice of progress and equity and all of the things that we want for our school districts for the last decade. And it was just great to talk to her, hear a perspective of what makes a good school trustee, and just a perspective that I don't think I've had on this show up until now. So very excited to share with you my conversation with Carolyn Broady. All right, Carolyn, I want to start with the weird story of, I don't know if it was how we met, but our first rather weird. What's your recollection of the first time that we met?
It was the first time we met, and we were in north of Toronto, and I was a brand new trustee, and I don't think I'd ever been so nervous to go to this conference because I've been a trustee, I think, 2 years, all the superintendents from across the province, all these educational leaders. So quite nervous about it all. And then it's time to leave, and my superintendent, Chris Kennedy's with me. He says, "I've got us a ride to the airport. Don't worry." And we're coming down the airport, and it's Chris, it's myself. So coming down the elevator, yourself and George Kuros. And my memory right away is I started to giggle as you started to go at George about the size of his suitcase and his shoes. And that's where it started. And it was just like, I was hysterical. And I laughed so hard the entire way to the airport from there as we did an hour drive to Pearson.
And I also remember, I'm pretty sure it was this one, because Pearson is a bit of a challenge in
To get
filling up your
gas,
rental
to get
car.
gas.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Where do I get now? No, that was early in my travel days as well, so I wasn't quite sure. But it's not as obvious like when you go to Vancouver. There's the gas, the fuel
Yeah.
thing is right there as you come in. You can't miss it. Well, Pearson doesn't give you that lecture. So I remember us driving. I don't remember if we
And
were a little worried
bickering.
about
The
catching
three of
a
you were
flight.
bickering about where to get gas. And I finally go, enough. We're taking a right off here. There's got to be a
We'll
gas
figure
station.
it out. We did. Yes. Yeah, that was a auspicious start to that time. So anyway, yes. And so since then, I've had lots of affiliation with West Vancouver and all the things, and you've been a part of that for I think that entire time. So you said that was early on. So maybe just share a little bit about your background and then what led you to pursue a role in public education.
So I first was elected as a trustee in the fall of 2011. So this is my fourth term. I became involved because, much as my mother did before, I grew up in West Vancouver, where I am a trustee now, where my kids went to school, and started volunteering very early on. And I have the inability to say no. And somehow, when my kids were in grade 4 and 2, I became the PAC chair and got involved with our district PAC. And the former superintendent, Jeff Jobson, coerced, begged, twisted my arm and asked me if I would consider running to be a trustee. And I never thought I would. I'm actually very shy by nature. The biggest thing that actually I hate is walking into a room full of strangers. I have to actually go to a luncheon today, and I'm already dreading it to make small talk with people I don't know. So I'm not quite sure how I ended up where I am, but I did run in 2011. I have been chair of the board since 2014. And again, I'm always wanting to live and learn more. And I became involved with the BC School Trustees Association, volunteering for them. and on various committees, joined their board. And I have been president of BC School Trustees for the last 2 years. And in that role, because I sit at the provincial table, you automatically sit at our national table with the Canadian School Boards Association. And what I have learned being at that table is just incredible, understanding the similarities across Canada with our education systems, but also the challenges and the differences. So
Yeah.
I will tell people that somehow in close to midlife, I was in my early 40s, that I ended up in the best career path possible in the strangest way possible. I
Yeah.
would never have
No,
thought I'd be here.
I want to get more into that, but I want to know when you look back, especially those early days in this role, can you think about what surprised you most? Like what was, oh, that's something I didn't realize was happening, or around education that kind of, oh, okay, I have to pay attention here because this is something I expect.
Probably the biggest thing with becoming a trustee, and I think this is something every trustee struggles with, is we think we're going in to really get our hands dirty and do the work. And to understand what governance is and
Right.
our role as governors of the system, just overseeing the system and not doing the day to day work, that's probably the biggest challenge. I remember a fellow trustee with a financial background started to roll up his sleeves, all set to try and do the budget with the secretary treasurer. And this, oh no, that's not your job. So that was probably the biggest adjustment. You're doing less work as a trustee in some ways than you are maybe as a parent volunteer in the school system or being involved that way. So that would be probably the biggest surprise coming in. I was lucky that I'd actually been involved in the system for the number of years. So I knew the people, I knew generally how the system works. So it was, yeah, I was very lucky.
Let's talk a little bit about that governance model. I interviewed Chris Smeaton, former superintendent in Alberta, who now actually works with school districts and school boards, the trustees in particular, to help them better understand the governance model. And maybe for those people who don't really know, let me just share a little bit about the overview of what is a governance model. And the other part of that, second part of that question is, I my understanding is that that is how most slash all school boards run, but maybe that's not true
Yeah.
either. So
Well,
maybe just give us a context of how that works across Canada. So what is governance, and how is it implemented?
governance, there's some great examples. Like it's you're setting the tracks for a train, but you're not actually running the trains. So you're setting the direction and the policy direction for a school district, but you're leaving the actual work of to your senior staff and to your administrators. You're really the major role of a school trustee and the oath of office you take when you're elected is to improve student outcomes. And you're doing that by your most important job as a board of education is to hire your superintendent or your director, as they're called in some provinces. And from there, that person, that leadership role runs the district. But in turn, trustees are responsible for making sure that we balance the budget and that we're aware of the local needs in our local community and trying to fulfill those needs. So I would say living in an urban center like I do, we have a lot of immigration. We're dealing with newer Canadians, English language learning issues, things like that. If you're in northern BC or northern Saskatchewan, it may be much more focused on Indigenous outcomes for some of your most vulnerable students or recruitment and retention. So the role of the locally elected board is really understanding the needs of your community, communicating them to your senior leadership team, but then supporting them in their work. And then the other piece of that is advocacy. Again, advocating to government for the needs of the people in your community and students in your community.
And so again, across Canada, is that, I know that's generally how boards work, but is that how all boards operate?
Across where there are elected boards, democratically elected boards, that is how it works. We are all in a governance structure. It's never meant to be a full-time job as a trustee. You're meant to be able to carry on your career. And the idea of being locally elected is anyone can run. You don't need to have an educational background. In many cases, you're benefited by not having an educational background. So at a board table, you might have someone from a business community. You might have someone who's volunteered extensively in your community. You might have a former teacher or education assistant or administrator, and that all those different perspectives coming together is what helps us figure out what the needs of the community are.
And what would you say is I don't know if it's disposition skills, because you're talking about having a variety of backgrounds, which
Yeah.
it has easily you can see the benefit. But is there a disposition that you think is best suited for a trustee?
I would say probably the biggest thing is to be curious, to be open minded, to park any preconceived notions at the door when you walk into that boardroom. Because you're elected it's a funny position. You're elected as a politician. In most provinces, you run at the same time. I think Quebec is the exception, as when your local municipal elections are taking place. So your mayor and council, they are truly answering to the community. But once a board of education or trustee is elected, they become part of a corporate board. So when you make a decision as a board, you may not agree with the board and you might vote against a decision. But the minute that decision is made, we have a responsibility to support that decision. So that's the difference. You're not seeing party politics play the same role.
Right. Yeah. No, that's powerful. And again, when it works, it works. It has a lot of benefits. When you, again, looking back at at that 2011 start to this career, how have you seen education change? When you look back and think, oh, this is the things we were dealing with then, and now here's the things we're dealing with now, and that's a change.
Yeah. In 2011, we were still talking all the time about the 20th century way of learning. Like that was the focus. Every conversation was around that. The shift I've seen in the last 14, 15 years is really that movement towards the AI. So many discussions about social media and the impact on students. I think that is probably the biggest change is the effect of cell phones. We talked about in 2011, 2012, a lot about digital citizenship and all the amazing things that was we're going to do for our education system. And I agree that so much wonderful stuff's happened, but we're also seeing the negative effects of that right now, which as you see with media across the country right now, it's across every province. The concerns about cell phone use, the concerns about the influence of social media. So I think that's the biggest change I've seen, and that's the biggest shift I think we're going to see going forward in the next 3 or 4 years.
And so, maybe just to build on that, maybe it's in that same vein. What are the really positive things when you look back at West Vancouver in particular that you're proud of, that you've seen as really positive shifts over the last while, and then maybe those things that are still concerning. And again, they may be the similar ideas, but maybe just talk about those
Yeah,
in two buckets of
yeah,
really proud of this, great, excellent changes. Here's the things that we're
yeah.
worried about.
I would say positively, our work around Indigenous education. In March, we actually signed our first protocol agreement with the Squamish Nation. This was 10, 15 years in the making. Really proud moment as a school district when we did that. And we had a celebration to that. And the talk was as walking together and walking side by side, and that we are now families. I think that work around reconciliation and identifying and improving the needs to support Indigenous students is something we should all be very proud of in our school district. Also, supporting our most vulnerable students. I think that's where our focus has to be. We are from a very high achieving school district. That's always been the case. But the fact that we are doing more and more to support our most vulnerable students is something our board and district should be proud of. As far as moving the negatives? I don't see a lot of negatives. We are very lucky in having Chris Kennedy as our superintendent. He's a very much a visionary leader. He's always out there trying to find the new and next best thing. In the last 6 or 7 years, we've done incredible work around physical literacy. Before that, and tying that to the social emotional learning. So we're really lucky in the school district with the leadership team we have and their focus on students and the needs of students. The other thing I think we've really focused in on, which we didn't probably 10 years ago, are about the transitions. In BC, childcare is now under the Education Ministry of Education, and talking about those transitions from pre-K to kindergarten, from elementary school to high school, and those post-secondary transitions. And it's about authentic transitions. Not every student is going to go to university, but it's making sure that they find that path forward, be it trades, be it college, university, or even into the workforce. I think that's the other, we've put a lot of emphasis there.
Again, as part of your role in with the Canadian School Board Association, obviously you're mostly familiar with British Columbia, but you also have some sense of what's going on across Canada. We talked a little bit about earlier about what's happening in Nova Scotia with the expanding of school board, but maybe it's Nova Scotia, but maybe there's another province that you look at that you're curious about in terms of the way that they're doing some specific aspect of education or in their governance or whatever that may be. So just wonder if you have any province that comes to mind in terms of interested around some of the work that's happening in a different part of Canada.
Yeah. I'd say The concerns across Canada are about the elimination of school boards. You see it in Nova Scotia. You see the concerns that parents have now because there's nowhere outside of the ministry to bring your questions if you're not getting your answers in your local school district. So we're hearing a lot about that. I'm very interested in Manitoba because Manitoba is the only jurisdiction in Canada where boards of education still have taxation ability. So I would like to learn more and do some data research to understand what's working well with that and what may
Right.
not be. Every other jurisdiction in Canada, that taxation ability has been removed over the years. I think the Manitoba model to see how what's working better there when you can raise those taxes lower locally, but what may be the challenges around that as well. I think
That's
there's more
interesting. I
equity.
didn't know that. I
Yeah.
didn't know that they were the only ones that still did that because
Yeah.
it's a big issue here in Saskatchewan right now,
Mhm.
and it always has been, particularly with some of the negotiations that are happening, uh, because the government is asking local schools to take up the responsibility in terms of certain aspects of funding, to which the response is, "Yeah, but we're handcuffed because we
Yeah.
can't raise mill rates." And you mentioned it, maybe it seems to be, perhaps I thought it was a conservative government thing, but that's obviously not true in British Columbia. So it's not really, doesn't seem to be as politically driven, but doesn't seem to be around a certain political ideology. So yeah, I didn't. Yeah, it
Yeah.
does. So, are you saying? I guess I'm saying, do you see? Because you're curious about Manitoba. So, are you saying? Because have you ever had? When was it
No,
taken away in British
in the
Columbia?
'90s here in BC. So
Oh,
I
wow.
think the reality is it's more equitable when the money goes into into government and is pushed back out. But what it
Sure.
does is, in some ways, it pits districts against each other. You've got a fast growing district, say like Surrey here in BC, and then you've got districts that are in northern BC and rural and remote areas where they're in funding protection because they're losing so many kids. And so Surrey's struggling with the crunch around creating space and having the capital to build schools and do the rest of it. And we've got other communities in northern BC that are struggling because the school is the center of that community. And as people are leaving it, as jobs are disappearing, how do you support those communities? So that I think is the push and pull that government now with the funding being there has to deal with. To that end, though, if you're in a small community that is maybe has lost their local mill or lost things like that, you can't raise the taxes to give as to provide the programming that you could say in my school district. So that's where the equity piece
Sure.
comes, which is
Yeah.
so important.
Yeah. No. Now you've got me curious to. I want to learn more about what's happening in Manitoba and how. And
Yeah.
that's where I'm. That's where I was born and raised. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
My
very curious.
counterpart, Alan Campbell, who's in Stonewall, just outside of
Right
Winnipeg.
outside Winnipeg. Yeah.
He's president of CSP and former president in Manitoba. And we were supposed to be in a meeting a few weeks ago, and I can't be there. We're having a budget meeting. We're setting the numbers, and they're very much, they have to explain that to the community in very clear
Yeah.
terms, why they need to
Yeah.
raise the money they're raising. So something I want to dig more into going forward.
This episode is brought to you by Advanced Learning Partnerships, also known as ALP. We are a professional learning consulting group that serves communities across North America. We are partners, designers, and agents for change. You can learn more about the work we do at alplearn.com. And now back to the show. One of the things that's the common theme in my podcast is just leadership in general. And again, you have a specific leadership role, but can you just share maybe a leadership challenge that you've had in the past? Walk us through the thought process of a leadership challenge that you faced. Could be recently, it could be in the past, that kind of that comes to mind when you think about, yeah, that was a tough one, but I don't know, maybe, and it doesn't always have to be a happy ending either. It could be like, yeah, we didn't get it right, or whatever that leadership challenge might be.
I would probably say the most difficult time as a board chair was during COVID when it was so divisive when we had parents on one side wanting concerned, schools shut, masking, the rest of it, and we had others wanting more freedoms. Probably the most difficult time for me, and I will admit to it, I think I had cried a little bit on a Zoom call with all the Metro and Fraser Valley superintendents and the Minister of Education and a few other people when Surrey, during COVID, brought in masking and the rest of the province didn't. And I can remember sitting on a Zoom call and getting very choked up and saying, how do I tell people in my community that they don't deserve to be as safe, the children as they are in Surrey? And that was probably one of the scariest moments I had in front of a lot of educational leaders, but one of the proudest I am for standing up and speaking to that. when I said that, a number of other trustees followed along after me with the ability to speak. And I do think we affected change, but it was very hard. We held on to the fact that through all this, we were following public health guidance. That's what got, I think, every district in the country through this. But it was the private, not challenge, but the questioning of a decision that I felt needed to be in the best interest of every child. And that was probably one of the more challenging moments I had, and probably one of the scariest. I was shaking quite a bit as I had that conversation, but I believe a group of us effected change that night that was better for all and better for our students.
But with that particular issue, regardless of which side it was on, and regardless of what path you chose, you still recognize that no matter what decision you're going to make here, it's not everyone's going to
No,
fall in line. So thinking through that, how do you work towards? Because if you feel like it had whatever level of success and you're proud of it, I feel like you probably did something, whether certainly consciously, to help quell that divisiveness, to get people to see, listen, even if you don't agree with this, because obviously the people that wanted that they're good, but you still have this other factor of people who are, yeah, I'm not sure. Like, how do you work with, how do you help that
I
ease
think
that?
it's pulling back, and I will say this when I speak publicly or I do anything else. It's pulling back to make the decision always is what is good for kids. And I think that's where it was, is this is the best thing for kids and families if this is a universal thing, not just in one school district. I think if I remember correctly, my conversation was that COVID doesn't end at the border of Surrey to Delta. This is something that needs to be universal. But I think it really, I believe in the education system. And I believe that we have so many people that are dedicated and working so hard. And it's all about the kids and doing what's best to support students. And I think that is what I see in my colleagues as why they're in this, why they're doing what they're doing is they're here to support kids.
Yeah, I think that you go back to those universally accepted truths. Everybody wants what's best for kids, right? So if we can frame it in that context, even if you don't agree with it, your your position is not politically motivated. It
No.
is really designed to be like, we just want what's best for
Yeah.
kids.
And even morally, like my moral code is I stuck to it. And I think that's what most people are. I knew what I needed to do to live with myself coming out of this.
And as you've seen different folks enter into that trustee position in West Vancouver and other places. And I think about one of the challenges that I think is that education is facing is leadership. There's a leadership crisis. We have fewer people. This is not true in education. This is true everywhere. We have fewer people
Oh, yeah.
interested in politics, fewer people, just because of, it's obvious that these positions can be very, I mean, you probably face it too. People that are, that can say things and about you, about the organization, through, whether it's through social media or other forms. That's tough to take sometimes. But at the same time, I think it's an obligation that we continue to grow and develop leadership. So specifically around that trustee role, what would you say to a young person who I think you would make an excellent trustee because they have that curiosity. They have some of those things that you've identified. What would you say to maybe give advice to them if they're thinking about some of these roles? What should they or be do or think about?
I think the most important thing is young trustee, older trustee, whoever it is, why are you doing it? Because what we do see at times is trustees come in, you'll see it in a local election because there might be a school closure or amalgamations, or it might be because buses are being removed or things like that. Don't come in with one issue because that's not going to work. You're there for 4 years and that issue may be dealt with in the first 6 months. Come in curious and come in with the focus that you want to improve things for every student. And in parts of the country, we have ward systems. In parts of the country, we may have someone elected on a certain, I promise the voters that I'm going to push this through. That's not how it works. To be a successful trustee, you have to be there to support every child and every family. And that would be my bit of advice. If you're coming in as a one issue trustee, please don't run.
So
Be
do you see with that, have you seen trustees, to be specific here, but just have their eyes open to, because maybe they came in a little bit more focused on one or two things or had a bias around how they thought things were. And through their time, their tenure, they realized, oh, wow. And they were maybe especially pleasantly surprised at maybe some of the misconceptions that they had about what's actually happening in schools. Because that's part of, I think, the challenge of schools is getting the word out that what it was like when you were a kid is not the same experience that's happening now, and it can't be the same experience that you had 20, 30 years ago. So I wonder if
Yeah.
there's any sort of something that comes to mind about
Yeah,
that.
that but I would agree that there's nothing more rewarding when you do see someone get past it. I've being around as long as I have and going to conferences, you have these conversations over the dinner table, you do whatever, and it's so wonderful to see when that individual who may have started that one with one idea or one focus understands the whole system. That's what's so amazing. And when you see that, and that's where boards work well together when people can take that step. But just driving back to how the system has changed. We talk about that a lot. I think we see a lot of parents. We did this when I was a kid. Cursive writing is one that comes up all the time, right?
Right? That's right.
Yeah, and I will admit my son's needs to work on his signature at 26, but also keyboarding in today's world is just as important. So it's just how that shift has happened and how to support it. And I probably won't make friends with some people as I say what I'm going to say next, but I also think we need to value educators. I think sometimes when we get into situations as we move into bargaining, if you're talking about Saskatchewan right now, we downplay it. It is a complicated job, as many jobs are, complicated career, but we have to celebrate the fact that this is this incredibly special role and you're changing and influencing lives. And we need to really honor educators that are in the field and on the ground. And I don't think we do a good enough job of that.
And to that point, I know specific school board members of my own local school board. I think I'll say his name out loud because his name is Lou Young. And he was such an advocate for teachers. And I know it made a difference when a school board member, whether it was in the media or in a public appearance, honored and said those things out loud. It makes a big difference when a school board member is because other you may not know your school board members, like some of them are probably less visible than others. So you hear things like, oh, they have a particular idea or perspective that may not, that as an educator you think is conflicting. So when you hear a school board member honor and say and are proud of their teachers, that goes a long way. I don't know that school board members often realize the impact that
Yeah.
they have when they say and do those things, but it makes a big difference.
100% it does. Um, and just acknowledging that it's not always an easy job. Our classrooms are more complex than they were 30 years ago. And as boards, as senior leadership teams, as local unions or local teachers, we have to figure out how to manage that because we need young people to continue to go into the career path and to become
That's great.
teachers and EAs, and they need
Right.
to be supported.
So this could be a good transition to my next question, which is, and I can tell you, everybody that I asked it, they don't like this question. Okay.
Okay.
You're not going to like it because it's too limiting. Name one person today that you're grateful for in education. So it could be, and it could be super recency bias. Maybe you were at a school yesterday and maybe there was an administrator or a secretary, whomever that just shines for you. So it doesn't always have to be the big one. It can be somebody just had this really, I'm really grateful for someone. So name one person.
A teacher in our school district, Stefan Huskisson. You might know his wife, Michelle Labounty, who's also in our district.
Yeah.
Stefan is and was for my kids that teacher that made a difference. He knew every kid by name. He in the hallways, whatever. I had a child that went through some health issues, and he was amazing in his support around that. And I cannot say enough of what he did over those years.
Lovely. I love the specificity. People really, like I said, they balk at the question and then they sometimes divert to
I had
talking
three or
about.
four other names went through my head
I'm
first.
sure you did.
Not
Yes, and that's
yes,
the point
there's
of
so
it.
many people I could bring up,
But
but
Stefan gets the shout out today. You can find there'll be lots of other ways to shout out those other people. Oh, fantastic. So as we wind down our time together, I always just end my podcast with these three questions, just get to know people a little bit more. So the first one is, what are you reading and it could be listening to do if that's what you consume. And I'm thinking this more for, yeah, it can be anything. That's my question. What are you reading today?
A book I'm reading right now is called Horse by Geraldine Brooks. And it's about the Civil War. And it's about a horse. It's based on the factual thing about the horse named Lexington, who was a Kentucky Derby winner that, pardon me, his protege is still winning the derbies and the rest of it. I'm not a big horse racing fan, but enough. But also the parallel story taken from a picture about the young black groom that's there. And they've created the fictional story of the life of the young groom. It's really good. Highly recommended. Not my usual reading. And it's one that
You're usually reading then.
Oh, a mixture of stuff, but I mostly with my book clubs, it's what you'd see on the shelves at Indigo. But this one, the title didn't appeal to me, and I almost didn't pick it up, and I'm so glad I did.
So I'm admitting this. People that know me know this, but I'm admitting I do not read fiction, and that is not a good thing. And I actually found out it's not a good thing for a lot of reasons. But a book I recently read, which is nonfiction, called Stolen Focus, talked about why it was examining why it is that we as a society are having more difficulty focusing. And the obvious people
Mm,
always just think about, well, it's technology, and yes, that is part of it, but there's more than just that. And one of the things which I was very surprised to hear, and it's encouraged me, is people need to read more fiction. We don't read enough fiction because fiction um, allows us to enter another world and use our imaginations in a way that even reading nonfiction doesn't. So I
yeah.
already have a book. I already have a fictional book, which I haven't read fiction for a while. So I'm reading it now. So anyway, well, then I
But
appreciate that
but
share.
to your point, Dean, it's interesting because I've for a long time struggled to read again. I actually have consciously put my phone or my iPad away
Yeah,
because it was too easy to read 4 or 5 pages and pick up my phone and start mindlessly scrolling. So I think we have to make a conscious effort to go back
for sure.
to that sustained focus with reading.
Yeah, yeah. And just again, he just shares a lot of interesting insights and facts and research as to why
Yeah.
reading fiction has that benefit. So when you're not reading and you're just wanting to get away and escape and watch, and I always push towards, is there something mindless that you watch that just makes everybody that just listen, we don't always have to be so sophisticated in
Yeah.
our consumptions. I know a lot of people don't like this question again because like they don't want to, but maybe you don't. I'm not saying you do,
Yeah.
but like just for pure okay, escapism.
Recently, with my tissue box beside me, I watched the miniseries One Day. It'd been, recommended. It was a movie about 10 years ago, and it's set in England, and it's about a young couple that meets at university graduation, and it follows their lives for 20 years on the same I think it's July 15th, and how they intertwine,
Okay.
and it's a good escapism. It's a really great escapism. And the other one I'm watching in the background right now is because my daughter's younger and she's rediscovering stuff, is she's watching Homeland. And I forget, and I keep getting sucked in and
Yes.
sitting down and watching parts of it with her because
Okay.
it was so good.
Yeah, I remember watching I did watch Homeland back years, but this one day, this because that premise intrigues me, and it reminds me of that series of films that Ethan Hawke was in where he
Yes.
isn't
Yeah.
it? You know
Sunrise.
what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Something before sunrise. Or,
Sunrise,
yeah.
Sunset. Yeah,
Yeah.
my daughter really likes that one, and I haven't seen all of them, but it's a
Yeah.
similar concept where there's a theme through it, but okay, I'm gonna check
Yeah.
that one out.
Yeah. But
Last
you do need some Kleenex when you're watching it. So it's a bit of a
uh,
tearjerker.
I like to think I can get without it, but also my wife teases me. You say, "You always cry during like sports and stuff like that." I'm like, but anyway, as I get older, I know I'm a little bit more emotional, especially when it comes to my grandkids and stuff like that. But I'll see. Anyway, I'll get back to you on how I made it through that movie. But I definitely want to watch that one. So my last question is around the people coming to Vancouver/West Vancouver. Easy things that they might Google things to do. There's probably a lot of things that are pretty obvious, but I'm wondering as a local, somebody that's lived there their whole life, what's a hidden gem that like, this might not be the first thing that comes to mind, but a place could be restaurant, could be just a hike, there's obviously so much to do there, but something that might not be the first thing on a Google search to do in the area.
I would say North Van first, Honey's Donuts in Deep Cove. If people have come to Vancouver and they haven't been out to Deep Cove in North Van, it's a gem. Feel like you're in a different part of the world. But in West Van, I would say it's Whitecliff Park out near Horseshoe Bay. But if you want a wonderful place to grab a piece of pizza or a coffee with an incredible view, partway up Cypress Bowl is a restaurant called The Shed. And it's open air and picnic tables, and they do a great pizza and a great coffee, and you have a view of all of Vancouver. It's a pretty
Okay.
nice way to spend an afternoon.
Listen, often when I do some sort of a walk or and I will
Well,
get
tell 'em to take
together.
you up to the
Yeah,
shed.
because he only takes me to Booster
Booster
Juice.
juice.
Like,
I know.
that's about as adventurous he gets, so I'm gonna say, "Hey, why don't we try that pizza place?" Is The
The
Shed?
shed. The shed.
The
Yeah,
Shed. Okay, I wanna go there next, and I think I'm gonna
yeah.
see if I can get that out. Anyway, thank you so much,
Great,
Carolyn, for
thank you.
this.
That
This
was
was
lots of
wonderful.
fun. So, yeah.
Yes. Hopefully, we'll see each other soon sometime, and maybe I'll give you a ride somewhere and
Yeah.
give you a little more entertainment if I can.
Take care. Thank you so much, Dean.